The Vietnam War, which lasted from 1955 to 1975, was one of the most complex and divisive conflicts of the 20th century, rooted in decades of colonial history, Cold War tensions, and nationalist struggles. The origins of the war can be traced back to the mid-19th century, when Vietnam became part of French Indochina, a colonial possession of France. For nearly a century, the Vietnamese people lived under French rule, which was marked by economic exploitation and political repression. By the early 20th century, nationalist movements began to emerge, seeking independence from colonial domination. Among these movements, the Viet Minh, led by communist revolutionary Ho Chi Minh, gained prominence during World War II when Japan occupied Vietnam. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Ho Chi Minh declared Vietnam's independence, drawing inspiration from the American Declaration of Independence. However, France, determined to reclaim its colony, refused to recognize Vietnamese sovereignty, leading to the First Indochina War 1946 to 1954. The Viet Minh, employing guerrilla tactics and benefiting from widespread popular support, gradually wore down French forces. The decisive turning point came in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, where the French suffered a catastrophic defeat, forcing them to negotiate a withdrawal. The subsequent Geneva Accords temporarily divided Vietnam at the 17th parallel, with Ho Chi Minh's communist government controlling the north and a US-backed anti-communist regime under Ngo Dinh Diem governing the south. The agreement also called for nationwide elections in 1956 to reunify the country, but these never took place, as the US and South Vietnam feared a communist victory. Viet Cong grew stronger. President John F. Kennedy expanded America's role, sending more troops and equipment. After Kennedy's assassination in 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson further escalated US involvement, using the controversial Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964 as justification to obtain broad military powers from Congress. The subsequent bombing campaigns, such as Operation Rolling Thunder. The aftermath of the Vietnam War was devastating for all parties involved. Vietnam suffered immense destruction, with millions of civilians dead, vast areas of farmland contaminated by chemicals, and infrastructure in ruins. The war also left deep scars in the US, where over 58,000 soldiers had died, and many more returned with physical and psychological wounds. Backed South Vietnamese government and the US insisting on a mutual withdrawal of forces. Finally, in 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, allowing for the withdrawal of American troops while leaving the conflict unresolved. Without US support, South Vietnam's military quickly collapsed, and in April 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, reunifying the country under communist rule. The war also became increasingly unpopular at home, as television broadcasts brought graphic images of combat, civilian casualties, and the use of chemical defoliants like Agent Orange into American living rooms, fueling widespread anti-war protests. The Tet Offensive of 1968 was a pivotal moment in the war, shattering the illusion that the US and South Vietnam were close to victory. And the deployment of hundreds of thousands of American troops marked the full-scale entry of the US into the war. Despite superior firepower and technology, the US military struggled against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army, NVA, who utilized guerrilla warfare, intricate tunnel systems, and knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. Although the Viet Cong suffered heavy losses and failed to hold any major cities, the sheer scale of the attacks demonstrated their resilience and shocked the American public, leading to a decline in support for the war. President Johnson, facing mounting opposition, announced he would not seek re-election, and the anti-war movement grew stronger. His successor, Richard Nixon, promised Vietnamization, gradually withdrawing US troops while strengthening South Vietnam's military, but also expanded the conflict by secretly bombing Cambodia and Laos to disrupt communist supply routes. These actions further inflamed domestic unrest, culminating in events like the Kent State shootings in 1970, where National Guardsmen killed 4 student protesters. Meanwhile, peace negotiations in Paris dragged on for years, with North Vietnam demanding the removal of the US. Veterans faced neglect and stigma, struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and the effects of exposure to toxic substances. The war also eroded public trust in the government, as revelations about misleading official statements, such as the Pentagon Papers, exposed systemic deception. In Southeast Asia, the conflict spilled over into neighboring Cambodia and Laos, where U.S. bombing campaigns and political instability contributed to the rise of the Khmer Rouge, leading to genocide in Cambodia. Meanwhile, Vietnam faced years of economic hardship under communist rule, though relations with the U.S. eventually normalized in the 1990s. The Vietnam War remains a subject of intense historical debate, with scholars examining the motivations for U.S. involvement, the effectiveness of military strategy, and the broader implications of the conflict. It serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of military power, the consequences of foreign intervention, and the importance of understanding the political and cultural complexities of other nations. The war's legacy continues to influence American foreign policy, military doctrine, and public opinion, reminding future generations of the human cost of prolonged and ambiguous conflicts.